This is the story of a brave man. His courage helped transform a tyrant's domain into a republic. His name was Horatius. He was a Roman, a soldier, and he stood alone against an army. Before Rome was a republic, it was ruled by kings. The first, so the legends say, was named Romulus. He founded Rome in 753 BC. 6 kings of varying quality followed the reign of Romulus over the next roughly 200 years. The last of these were Etruscans, from the line of Tarquin. They'd immigrated to Rome sometime before our story starts. By the early 500s, Rome consisted of the city itself and a small patch of the Italian peninsula around it. Their neighbors to the north were a loose network of Etruscan cities who shared customs and a religion, but they were just as likely to fight one another as they were to form an alliance. The Romans' neighbors to the south were the Samnites and Greek-speaking peoples. At first, a senate of nobles appointed a king to rule Rome for life, but that all changed with Tarquin the Younger. Tarquin the Younger seized the kingship in 534 BC after orchestrating the assassination of his predecessor. Now keep in mind, we're speaking of a time of myth here, that distant point where history and legend can hardly be separated from one another. But it was said that Tarquin the Younger became known as Tarquin the Proud because he's a vain and oppressive tyrant. He formed an armed bodyguard to force the Romans to obey him. He never consulted with the Senate, not even about wars or treaties. He exiled people without due process, and he had people executed without consulting the courts. He taxed the rich, and he forced the poor to labor on monuments and buildings for himself. He did as he pleased, and he ruled without humanity or justice. But the Roman people bore this yoke for 25 years. That is, until the son of Tarquin the Proud committed an act so malevolent, so egregious, that no good or decent Roman man could stand idly by. There would be blood. There would be sacrifice. And this is how it began. There was a city near Rome called Ardea that possessed a great wealth. Naturally, King Tarquin the Proud wanted some of that wealth for himself, so in 509 BC, he led the Roman army against the Ardean people. Tarquin promised the Romans a swift victory, but the war was dragging on and on. One night in the Roman war camp, several of the officers and captains, noblemen, were boasting about who had the most beautiful wife, who had the most devoted wife. One man, a good Roman noble named Collatinus, boasted that his wife exceeded all others in beauty and dignity. Her name was Lucretia. Among the listeners was Tarquin the Proud's son. His name was Sextus. Collatinus boasted again. He said, "I can prove to you that my dear wife Lucretia exceeds all others in beauty and dignity and Roman virtue." The men listening put him off. Of course, he would say that about his own wife. But Collatinus wouldn't back down. He encouraged his companions to mount their horses and ride with him back to his estate near Rome so he could prove to them all that he wasn't idly boasting. He was telling the truth. Collatinus's villa was only a few hours away. When Collatinus and his companions arrived, the beauty of Lucretia was immediately apparent, and not only that, they found her managing the affairs of the house and seeing to the servants. All of the men agreed that Collatinus was right. Now at dinner that evening, Sextus, the son of the king, he had a chance to exchange a few words with Lucretia. He was immediately overcome by lust, and he did the best he could to hide it. After the meal, all of the men, Collatinus and Sextus included, returned to the Roman war camp near Ardea. But a few days later, Sextus stole away from the camp unannounced and with a single attendant. He made his way back to the estate of Collatinus. Suspecting nothing, Lucretia greeted the prince at the door. "I have business with your husband," Sextus said. "His attendants told me that he had returned home and that I could find him here." Lucretia replied, "I fear your trip is in vain. He must still be at the war camp." "Well, it seems I've ridden all this way for nothing." But Lucretia wished to offer the prince proper Roman hospitality, as was his due. She had her servants prepare a meal, and she told him to take food and wine, and that if he needed to, he could rest in one of the guest chambers before returning to the war camp the next day. She had her servants see to his every need. But after the meal that night, when everyone was fast asleep, Sextus crept out of the guest chamber where he'd been pretending to sleep, and he entered the bedroom of Lucretia. He made his way to Lucretia's bed, and then he put his sword against her neck and had his way with her. He left her there soon after and disappeared into the night. The next day, Lucretia, overcome with grief, sent messengers to her husband and her father. She told them only that a tragedy had occurred, and they must return at once to the estate with a trusted man each. Lucretia would be there with the news waiting for them. Collatinus found his trusted friend Brutus, and he told him about the message. They immediately mounted their horses and rode from the war camp to his estate outside of Rome. When they arrived, Brutus and Collatinus ran into the house, and they found Lucretia there in her bedroom weeping. Lucretia's father and another man arrived just then. "Is all well?" Collatinus asked his wife. "What tragedy has happened here? Tell me now." Lucretia looked up at him with tears in her eyes, and then she said, "What can be well for a woman when she has lost her honor? The print of a strange man is in your bed, but only my body has been violated. My heart is pure, and death shall be my witness. But pledge to me now that this man shall not go unpunished. Swear it now." Collatinus was overcome. "By my gods and my ancestors," he said, "I swear it now. Tell me, woman, tell me what has happened." "His name is Sextus Tarquinius, and for my hospitality, he has given me hate instead. Armed with a blade, he took his pleasure with me, and now he has brought ruin upon me and upon himself, that is if you be men." Collatinus tried to comfort her. He told her it's the mind that sins, not the body. She had no intent to do him wrong, so she had committed no sin against him. "Please," he begged her, "calm down. Feel no guilt. I assure you that you've done me no wrong." But Lucretia could not be consoled. She continued to weep, and she told Collatinus, "It is for you to determine how to punish this prince. I acquit myself of the sin, but I do not absolve myself of the punishment." Just then, Lucretia took a knife out from under her dress and plunged it into her heart, and she fell forward, dead before she hit the ground. Husband and father stood over the crumpled heap of what was once daughter and wife, and they let loose a roar, a death wail. While husband and father wept and wailed with grief, Brutus, the trusted companion, stepped forward. He took the blade from Lucretia's heart, and he held it up for them to see. "The king may be my uncle," Brutus said, "but by the gods, I will hunt Tarquin and his wicked son and his wife and all his children. I will hunt them with sword, with fire, with whatever violence it may require. There is no king of Rome, not Tarquin, not any man." The speech of Brutus shocked the men into action. Each man in turn took the knife that had slain Lucretia and swore an oath as the blood ran down onto their hands. Then they lifted the body of Lucretia onto their shoulders. They carried her corpse to the market square for all to see. As the grim procession made its way through the town, people flocked to the spectacle. Once the crime was explained, though, many men joined the cause immediately. Collatinus was a pillar of the community and well respected in his town. An armed column was formed, and word spread ahead of it as it marched to Rome. By the time the armed column led by Brutus and Collatinus reached Rome, the anger had spread among the people there too. But only the boldest of the young men there were ready to join the cause. When a large crowd was gathered in the forum, Brutus gave another speech. "What has happened to the brave warriors of Rome?" he began. Brutus continued to chide the onlookers, to urge them to take some action against their king, and at last he convinced Collatinus himself to speak. Collatinus made his way to the center of the forum, and he looked at all of those who were gathered about him. "Romans, how dare you claim such a title? You sit on your hands and your arms gather dust while our so-called prince enters my house, rapes my noble wife, and shames her into suicide. How dare you claim that title?" As soon as Collatinus was done speaking, the rest of the Roman men took up their arms and swore vengeance against the king and his family. But Tarquin the Proud was not in Rome. He was still at the camp in Ardea, and word soon reached him of the rebellion fomenting at home. Immediately, Tarquin marched what he had of the army against his own city. But when Tarquin arrived, the gates of Rome were shut against him, and his own soldiers deserted him. The Romans inside the city threw out Tarquin's sons and exiled them. The Tarquins were then forced to flee and seek refuge some other place. But Sextus was soon killed, revenge taken for another heinous crime. Those left in Rome declared that henceforth Rome would no longer be ruled by a king, but it would be ruled by law. 2 consuls were soon elected, each serving a 1-year term, with the power of one checking the power of the other. The 2 men chosen, Collatinus and Brutus. After that, every man in Rome swore an oath to oppose anyone who was a menace to freedom, even if it meant death. Barely into his term as consul, though, Collatinus was forced to resign by the people of Rome. The full name of Collatinus was Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, and by that point, the name Tarquin was so offensive to Romans that merely uttering it in Rome seemed like a threat to liberty. So in accordance with the people's wishes, Collatinus stepped down. After that, the Romans declared that all members of the Tarquin race should be henceforth exiled from Rome. Tarquin wasn't just sitting on his hands. He first attempted a conspiracy to get some of those who were still in Rome to throw open the gates to him. But after treachery failed, Tarquin then turned to brute force, and he rallied another army to lead against Rome. Tarquin was able to persuade the Veii to join him in his battle against Rome. But the Roman army, led by Brutus, fought off the invasion. They eventually forced Tarquin to retreat, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The Romans lost almost as many men as their enemy, and their great general Brutus was killed in battle. But Tarquin the Proud rallied another army against Rome. he sought refuge in Clusium, which was ruled by the great king Lars Porsena. Clusium was a powerful Etruscan city, and Tarquin implored Lars Porsena to strike Rome. It would be better if there was a king there, Tarquin told him. Lars Porsena had a reputation as a warrior that put fear into men's hearts. So Lars Porsena gathered his army about him and marched on Rome. Word soon reached Rome that yet another army was approaching, and this time, the Roman Senate shook with fear. Now at this time, Rome was defended by walls on 3 sides. It relied on the river Tiber for protection, where a single bridge spanned the river. And to that bridge was exactly where Lars Porsena and Tarquin led their armies. Now just west of the bridge, outside of the city, lay a tall hill, and the Etruscan army easily took control of it. But a small band of Roman soldiers led the defense of the bridge below. A scarred battle veteran led them. His name was Horatius, and where one of his eyes had formerly been, there's only a mass of wrinkled skin. And so the men knew him as Horatius, the One-Eyed. Horatius told the platoons of spearmen to ready themselves for combat. They were also armed with swords and carried round shields. No sooner had Horatius done that than the Etruscans came down the hill at a run like a wave. The sun glinted off their swords and armor. "Hold," the war captain grimaced. Horatius could feel the shiver of fear running through the Roman platoons around him. "Hold, for your ancestors and for your children, hold now." But one Roman soldier behind Horatius threw down his spear and shield and ran back into the city, and then another, and another. Then Horatius grabbed a man near him before he could run, and Horatius raised his voice for all to hear. "If you flee this field of battle now, mark my words. Your noble wives and handsome children will soon be taken, your blood will be poured out, and your names will be forgotten." But still the Romans ran. They were nothing more than a frightened mob. The final few pleaded with Horatius to follow them. "Come back into the city with us. Take refuge there. We can't hold this bridge. It can't be done." As another handful of Roman soldiers threw down their swords and ran, Horatius said, "If you be cowards, at least perform one noble act. Destroy the bridge behind me, but I intend to fight this battle." As the last of his comrades, but 2, streamed back into the city, Horatius strode forward and stood at the entrance of the bridge. There he made his stand. Horatius glared into the Etruscan ranks as if he was still at the head of a great army. Not once did Horatius look back, nor did his 2 comrades, Spurius and Titus. The Etruscan warriors stopped dead in their tracks. They were stunned. Were these 3 men charmed by the gods? Were they madmen? Or was it a ruse? No matter. The Etruscans hurled their spears and javelins at the 3 men on the bridge, but to no effect. Then the Etruscan warriors charged forward with swords at the ready, and they fell upon the trio of Romans at the head of the bridge. The 3 Roman soldiers left there on that bridge slathered themselves in the gore of their enemies. Horatius shattered his spear in an Etruscan's armpit. Then, like fiends, Horatius and his 2 loyal comrades hacked and slashed and cut their way through Etruscan soldier after Etruscan soldier until the Etruscans fell back, shocked, stunned by the violence that had been done upon them by just 3 men. A few of them ventured forth and dragged their wounded comrades back to the Etruscan lines. During the reprieve from battle, the 3 exhausted Romans knelt to rest. The 3 Romans were hidden from their enemy's view by the pile of bodies around them on the bridge. But just then, Horatius heard shouts from behind them. The Roman engineers had arrived at last to do their work and destroy the bridge. Horatius looked at the 2 men who were left with him. Horatius was panting. He was trying to regain his breath. He was exhausted. His sword arm was numb with fatigue, and he could scarcely lift it again. Blood and tears streamed down his cheeks. Horatius was a man, not a god. Courage, remember, is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. "Your honor is secure now," Horatius told Spurius and Titus. "Now go, back into Rome. The bridge will soon be gone, and Rome will need more brave men to survive what soon will follow." Titus and Spurius protested, but Horatius wouldn't hear of it. Now Horatius was alone, and the Roman engineers were sawing and cutting away at the wooden bridge's supports, ready to bring it down. But the Etruscan captains recognized what the Romans were up to, and yet no Etruscan man came forward to challenge the lone Roman on the bridge. They looked from neighbor to neighbor. "You go. No, you go. No, you take him on." And yet no one advanced. Now Horatius at last gathered himself back to his feet, and he took up sword and shield once more. "Slaves!" he shouted at the Etruscan ranks. "That's all you are, an entire army against 1 man, and yet you still hang back? Come forward now. Meet your fate." Then Horatius pried a spear from the body of a dead man before him and hurled it into the Etruscan ranks, but it fell harmlessly in the grass before them, another act of Roman defiance. In response, the Etruscans let loose a rain of javelins. They poured down over Horatius, but he took them all on his shield, and no serious wound was done. And yet, Horatius stood his ground. The Etruscans charged. They all sprinted after their captains toward the bridge. But before they could reach Horatius, the last bridge support was cut away, and the bridge collapsed beneath his feet. Horatius dove into the river and began swimming for the Roman shore. The Romans on the riverbank cheered and shouted and urged Horatius on. But as Horatius swam across the river, spears came down all around him. Some say that Horatius made it across the river that day. He was unscathed, and when he got out of the river, all of the Romans gave him gifts proportionate to their means, and they built a statue of him. But others still say he died there that day, and it was his sacrifice that helped inspire the Romans to continue to fight. In any case, a statue was made in his honor, but the true end of Horatius' life is still a mystery. The fate of the young republic was not decided just yet. The courage of Horatius had held off Tarquin and Lars Porsena only for the moment. After the destruction of the bridge, the Etruscans then encircled the city of Rome and laid siege to it. They cut the city off from any chance of resupply, and then they waited and waited. If Tarquin could not regain Rome by force, then he would starve them into submission. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this retelling of the story of how Rome became a republic. In part 2, we're going to take a look at the siege that follows, the story of an assassin, a great sacrifice, and there's going to be a whole lot more in there. I've already started work on part 2, so it shouldn't be too long before that comes out. I really appreciate you guys sticking around this long. Thank you so much for watching. Please like this video so we can share our passion and our excitement for ancient history with even more people. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss part 2 of the story of how Rome became a republic. My name is Jay, and I'll see you next time.